Hello, everyone. Something too serious today, really, I would say. I'm privileged to be talking to Yeonmi Park. Born in 1993 in North Korea, author of In Order to Live, 2015, a book which I just finished reading today, and human rights activist and TED speaker, Yeonmi Park grew up in a punishing totalitarian society based on Stalinist and Maoist principles, perhaps the last Stalinist-era totalitarian state on earth, and devoted to the worship of Kim Jong-il and his family. But at the age of 13, she and her family made a daring escape to China in search of a life free of tyranny and indeed a life at all. In her viral talks, viewed online nearly 350 million times, and in her book, Park urges audiences to recognize, think about, and resist the oppression that exists in North Korea and around the world. Hi there.
Hi, Dr. Peterson. It's an honor to be on your show.
It's very nice to see you. I finished about the last third of this book this morning, and it makes for harrowing reading. There's no doubt about that. So you lived through some of the harshest times, I would say. You and your family likely lived through some of the harshest times in North Korea in the 90s after the Berlin Wall fell and the Russian communists stopped supporting North Korea's economy. Maybe we could start, I think, by just allowing you to tell your story. So you can start wherever you'd like. And
Thank you. Exactly as you mentioned, after Soviet Union collapsed, they were stopped helping North Korean regime. And North Korean regime is like run by central government economy. So they decide how much rice you can eat that day per person based on their class. So even though the biggest irony of North Korea is that it was founded the idea of equality, make everybody the same, the communism, and then they call even themselves as a socialist paradise. But they made North Koreans into three big categories of classes, and within three categories, they divided 50 subcategories of classes. So it became the most unequal society that you can imagine right now in our human history. I was born in the northern part of North Korea. So during this great famine that was man-made famine by Kim regime, that's where most of North Koreans died, in the northern part where I was born. And the people in Pyongyang, in the capital, they were still well fed. So the model example that I found was actually the Hunger Games. There is a capital and they divide 13 different districts. They make everybody else outside the capital on verge of surviving. So people do not think about what is the meaning of life, what is freedom. All they have to think about is next meal. Like, can I find food to feed my child? And in Pyongyang, they are really well fed and they have every intention to maintain the system and the regime. So that's where I was born in the 1993. Seeing the dead bodies on the streets was literally everyday thing. I never knew that was like weird word. And that's what got me the first when I came out. People were saying, why there's no revolution in North Korea. And first of all, we don't even know the vocabulary revolution in North Korea. It's a country where they don't teach us about the word love. There's no romantic love in North Korea. I never heard my mom telling me that she loved me. The only word that we know, love, is that written form of the word where we describe our feelings towards the dear leader, not about to another human. So there's no word for love, no word for human rights, dignity, freedom. And that's why, people in North Korea, they don't know they are oppressed. They don't know they are slaved.
You said the information control was so total that you had absolutely no idea what was happening in the outside world. And you believed at that time that despite what you saw around you, that other countries were much worse.
So even till right now in this 21st century, North Koreans do not even know the existence of internet. And we do not even have electricity. So, of course, in school, I never even seen the map of the world. I never even knew. So in school in North Korea, they don't teach me that I'm an Asian. They teach me that I'm a Kim Il-sung race. And North Korean calendar begins not when the Jesus Christ was born, when Kim Il-sung was born. So they cut out entire information, and people literally get executed for watching full information. And that is a crime to be dead in North Korea. So you do not have a freedom even to travel abroad. It's an entire black hole of information. You don't know outside that cave what's happening. But of course, like the leaders like Kim Jong-un, he went to school in Switzerland. The top elites go out, but the people at the bottom, most of them, never even seen the map of the world, and we don't even know what Africa, other continents, other race, and that was like me.
And you described the conditions that you grew up in. So you're, first of all, what stands out quite remarkably is the degree of hunger.
Yeah.
So tell me a bit about what it was like when you were a kid in the 90s in Korea with regards to eating.
So North Koreans are on average 3 to 4 inches shorter than South Koreans because of the malnutrition. And I'm like 5'2", but most of North Korean are shorter than me. So if you are above 4'10" feet high, you must go to military. So tons of North Korean adult men are around 4'10", like even below that right now. So this severe malnutrition affects even our brain development. North Korea's average life expectancy is like, if somebody lives up to 60, we think they lived a really long life. Like my grandmother who died from malnutrition before her 60, everybody thought, oh, she lived long enough to do that. So it is a different planet we are talking about. Being in North Korea, of course, like only way for me to get my proteins were eating, grasshoppers, dragonflies, a lot of insects, tree barks, plants, flowers, and that's how we survive. And most of people die in the spring because that's when there's no like really insects and plants are. And that's where every spring there's most of people dying, and majority of people dying that time.
Yes, and you said that for you and for the people around you, spring wasn't a time of hope and renewal, but the absolute worst time of the year. And so maybe you can explain that.
Yeah, so every spring I remember my skin sort of like cut off from the like vitamin lackness that I would get dizzy, and it's like season of death every spring. The people who couldn't wait until the summer so the plants grow, and that's when like we all know that tons of people are gonna die. And I still remember I escaped in the spring at the March of 2007. One day I had a really bad stomach ache, and my mom took me to the hospital. But in North Korea, of course, there's no electricity. There's no x-ray machines, none of that. Literally a nurse using 1 meter to inject every patient in the hospital. And people don't die from cancer in North Korea. They die from infection and hunger mostly. And the doctor literally told my mom that she has appendix. I think we gotta operate on her like right now in this afternoon. And they do not use anesthesia. It's a very like people don't use anesthesia in North Korea. So they would cut my belly open that afternoon, and I was fainting. And they said, "Oh, she just malnourished. She got some infection. She doesn't have any appendix." And then they closed me back, and then it literally from our hospital to the bathroom, there were like piles of human bodies piled up, and you see children like chasing the rats, eating human eyes first, and then children catch these rats and they eat and they somehow die from I don't know what it is. Then rats eat the children back. So this cycle of us eating rats and they eat us back is going to continue.
Yeah, and you said that was happening in the hospital. You also mentioned in that episode that you woke up before the surgery was over because the anesthetic ran out.
Mm-hmm. It was not even like actually a full anesthetic. It was more like dose of, I think, sleeping pill, like a lot of tons of it. So, most of people in North Korea right now, even when they cut their legs open, sewing their bones, they do not give any anesthesia because it's a free healthcare and regime do not provide anything for the people.
So yeah, you mentioned as well, and so we can talk about your familial situation, that in the 1990s, the average wage in Korea was the equivalent of $2 a month. And so $1.90 a day is what the UN regards as the line between poverty, like absolute privation related poverty, and enough to barely subsist on, $1.90 a day. And so North Koreans were making as much in a month as the UN allows for poverty in a day. And you describe, eating virtually nothing. Rice was a luxury. Other forms of food, especially protein, were virtually unheard of, including fruit. And you, in some of the most memorable sections, you described going out into the fields with some other children, and you were about 7 or 8 years old, I guess, at this time, and catching dragonflies and roasting them with a lighter. Mm-hmm. And that was where you got your protein.
I ate tons of grasshoppers. I remember always, even though it was a free education when we go to school, so in North Korea, there's no concept of minor. And there's no concept of I. They don't allow us to use the word I. So even though, like I say, I like food, they say we like food. We like our country. So, and in that scenario, when we go to school, they all view us as a revolutionaries. And therefore, even the children, when they go to school, even 8, 7, 9 years old, we all have to work in the manual construction zones. So therefore, children, even when they can afford to go to school, it doesn't really mean much to them go to school. And most of children now in North Korea cannot afford to go to school and stay at home. And that was like my job. And parents go out to find food. Children would like clean and bring the drinking water. We don't even have a sewage. And going to mountains and bring a lot of the firewood because we don't have gas or coal, anything. We have to find anything we can find in the nature to cook food. So it's almost like 16th century of lifestyle that we go to the river and we bathe in the summertime, and in the winter we don't bathe. And only a few times we take bath. And that's why I still sometimes cannot believe that this is the same life that I'm living in right now.
So you mentioned earlier the class distinctions that were drawn in North Korea, and this is a characteristic of other totalitarian states, including those hypothetically predicated on absolute equality. You saw this happening in the Stalinist era and also in Maoist China, where if your family members were associated with a group that was deemed oppressive, then that still might impede your chances of survival, let alone progress 3 or 4 generations later. So and I believe your family, if I remember correctly, your grandfather or great-grandfather was a landowner. Mm-hmm. And so what did that mean?
So exactly, that's what North Korea does right now. They still have this thing called guilt by association. So if one person does wrong in North Korea, it doesn't mean just you are the one get punished. 3 to 8 generations gets punished. So when there was one high-ranking official escaped, they killed more than 30,000 people because of the one person's defection. And that's the cost that I had to bear, me speaking out afterwards of my 3-generation family back in North Korea that punished. So that's like that. My great-grandfather, I think, was small landowner before the communism, everything began in the 1900s, only that time. Because of that, then my grandmother her status was down. And the trickiest thing about North Korea's status is that there's not even something called marrying up. Some other countries, if you marry somebody from higher status, you can go up with them. But in North Korea, there's only going down. If you're high status and marrying somebody low, you go down with them. That's how they prevent mixing different classes.
Right, and so that's one of the consequences of this idea of group guilt. And so the system is predicated on the idea, or was predicated originally on the idea, that the landowning class was oppressive, tyrannical, and well, they were thieves. They were immoral thieves, essentially, as an entire class. And then that class guilt became so pervasive that it wasn't escapable across generations. That's where the idea of group guilt takes societies. And how would you contrast that to what you see in the West?
It is so unbelievable. I went to school in America, to university, and or talk about this, America also had a slavery and like all those oppression, but now they're collectively being guilty for their history. And how many generations ago was that even? And then people still trying to punish people who were not doing it at the time. And how do you choose your ancestors? I think that's what was the hardest thing for me to be in North Korea, is that I wish I had that option to choose the things back then, but it's not within your control. And now also in America, I see these trends of people going after people whose ancestors were perhaps the slave owners. But how is it even relevant to that individual right now, who they are? It's not something they contributed back then. So this idea of the guilt, collectively we associate them, and I just never knew that the rest of the world was going to be also like this in a different degree. But this is something that mainly North Korea holds against its people. They literally call your blood tainted. Because your father, your great-great-grandfather did something, that means you are forever, your blood is tainted. You are not redeemable. And almost now in America, I see that because some white people, their ancestors owned the slaves, they are redeemable. They should be forever guilty about their privilege. And the idea of this word guilt is also very, it's very hard to even look at this. And it's so heartbreaking. Why would you cause that kind of shame on other human? Why it's not their fault at all?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. But why you would want that to happen? Well, I think it's part of a demand for some hypothetical radical equality. It is the case that some people are born, we're all born with different advantages and disadvantages, and some of those are linked to our ethnicity and our race from time to time. And there's an attempt to, at least in principle, level the playing field, but it gets very dangerous when you try to equalize the outcomes, and when you enter the realm of guilt by group, that's a catastrophe. Everywhere that's ever been instituted, it's just a complete catastrophe, because exactly the same thing happened in the Soviet Union and in Maoist China. Your family, your father in particular, but also your mother, they, and many Koreans in the 1990s, when things fell apart so catastrophically, there was the reemergence of free enterprise in some sense. It was illegal, highly illegal. But tell us what your father and your mother did to survive.
So as you said, in the 90s, until then, so in North Korea right now, you cannot own cars, you cannot own houses, everything's private. So no private property in North Korea. You don't even own your stuff, everything is state-owned. So therefore, trading is illegal. That is you are committing a crime. But after the 90s, the Soviet Union collapsed, people had to find their own ways to survive outside the North Korean government. So the regime created this ideology called the Juche ideology, self-reliance ideology. So they told the people, okay, you alive on your own. We are not going to give you public distribution. You should figure out on your thing. Then how do we figure out on thing? We don't have freedom. We cannot even trade. So people started getting into this thing called the black market.
Right. So simultaneously, so what was happening in North Korea simultaneously was that the centralized government distribution system collapsed completely when it was no longer subsidized. And the North Korean government decided that everyone was now on their own, while simultaneously making any ownership and any trade whatsoever illegal and punishable with extreme punishments. So you were on your own, but forbidden to do anything that would get you out of your condition of starvation and privation.
Exactly. Now I'm thinking back, people said oh, what were you allowed to do in North Korea? I literally sat down one day, what was I allowed to do on my own? Literally just breathing. That is the only thing that I was allowed to do on my own. The regime literally tell you what to read, what to listen to. They even send you prison if you dance in a wrong way. If you wear jeans, they say it's a symbol of capitalism, they send you prison. If women wear like skirt, like pants, sometimes they say, oh, women have to wear a skirt. And if you watch wrong movie, and even the haircut, they tell you what kind of a hair. It was a funny joke for the Westerners. I cannot believe in North Korea you have to follow the haircut line, the guidelines. That's how controlling the regime is. They intervene every aspect of your life, and literally, when there are some times when we have even electricity, they would give us this radio that we cannot turn off. We can lower the volume, but can never turn off at home. So they force us to listen to this propaganda.
Right, and it's stuck on one channel.
Yeah, there's only one channel.
And you can't move the station selector to listen to anything else. That's illegal as well.
Yes. And that's the thing, like the regime doesn't allow us to do anything, but let us somehow find a way to survive. And of course, that means breaking the rules in North Korea. And my father was involved in black market, where he started selling dry fish, sugar, rice, clothes, clocks, and then later the metals like copper, silver, copper. And of course, that was illegal, and that's how it was sent to prison camp.
Right. And so he started to trade. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned in your book that the trading, as far as you were concerned, that the trading activity that emerged as a consequence of the black market gave North Koreans their first small taste of freedom. Mm-hmm. So what do you mean by that? Why did that strike you that way?
Because trading is a very empowering act, because until then, North Koreans have to rely on everything from the regime. Like literally even the water, everything. But when we started being creative and they say, okay, I can find the corn like a cheaper price in this region and then bring it to the other region and bring maybe fabric from this region to the other region. So we start getting more control over like how we even think, how to look. But it was like North Korea's marketization was extremely controlled and still very limited. But that was almost just giving the people now to think, oh, there is a life when I take my own control of my life. It's better than relying on government who just promises to take care of everything, but who never does. So now the younger generation has tasted marketization and thirsts for more freedom to be in the market system.
So your conclusion was that there was a direct connection between the act of engaging in free trade, say, at the personal level, and the idea of freedom itself.
Because it forces you to think for yourself when you trade. When you trade, it's not like you're thinking about, oh, how am I gonna like become a better revolutionary for the region? You think for yourself, like how is it gonna benefit me, my family, if I do this? But for North Koreans, thinking for yourself was something so unheard of. Like when we are born, the first thing they teach us how to bow properly and respect. And the first thing that my mom told me as a younger was not to even whisper because the birds and mice could hear me. She told me that the most dangerous thing in my body that I had was my tongue. If you slip out a wrong word, that is end of our like entire family clan. That's how much dangerous your tongue is.
Yes, so you carefully discuss your experiences with free trade and attribute to that the dawning idea of autonomy and individual freedom, whereas the act of trade is deemed illegal and immoral by the totalitarians, and that's associated in some manner with their insistence that private property is theft and that capitalism by its nature, which would include any free trade of any sort, is also corrupt and malevolent. Right. So, all right. So your mother, you talked about the restrictions on your speech, that even the mice had ears, so to speak. Your mother was almost thrown into prison camp because of comments that an uncle of yours made. I believe he was visiting from China. Mm-hmm. And so can you tell that story?
So when I was really young, we had some relatives from China. He came and told my mom, and Kim Il-sung, the first king, died. And that he said that he didn't die from hard working for the people. Because when the Kims died, they told us that, like literally they tell North Korean people, Kims are starving like all of us. They cannot even sleep. They work tirelessly for us. That how grateful we are for having a leader who's that selfless. But told my mom, actually, he didn't die from like those exhaustion from hard working. Rather, he died from some heart attack caused by medical condition. And then my mom was a true believer there. She was telling her best friend that, can you believe how foreign, like bad people are saying like these ridiculous rumors about our dear leader? And she was more like telling out of anger that she heard. It wasn't like she was questioning it. But even that was, so in North Korea right now, like you and me, and there's one person, three of us sitting here. I'm watching you, and you're watching the other person. And that person watching me. So even though I'm being a nice person, not gonna report on you, I know that someone watching me gonna report on me. But if that person is not reporting on me, then he's gonna be also reported by the other person. So you're being spied, and you're just spied on someone. That kind of system made us to not trust in another human. It killed our like trust in another person. Like we are always paranoid. So that's a good lesson for my mom to learn. Even she thought all her life that was her best friend. She was a spy. And she told the officials, and my mom almost like risked killing all of us. But the thing is, because she never slipped the word to another person, and she said from the intention of defending the revolution, they like pardoned her and told her never ever say something like that ever to anybody. So even my father never knew what was happening there.
Right. So even though she thought the rumor was a lie, and when she talked about it, she was outraged, that was still enough for a full investigation with a tremendous amount of danger associated. And it was luck in large part that she escaped from more severe punishment. And the fact maybe that she had small children.
Definitely. Like right in North Korea, like when you have a newspaper, every front page has to be Kim's. But when you turn in the back of the newspaper, you don't see the photo of Kim's. By mistake, if you read that newspaper, your family goes 3 generations to the concentration camp. So
if you rip it.
Oh yeah, so it's like if you get a newspaper, you gotta be very careful how the photo is gonna be positioned. So every household in North Korea have to have portraits of Kims. If your house caught on fire, the first thing is not you holding your child and one up. You have to hold the portraits till your death. Otherwise, it's gonna kill 3 generations of your family again. So this is like the Kims are gods to us. They are almighty, who can read our thoughts. I literally believe that it was so North Korea copied the Bible. In its exact Bible, Kim Il-sung was a god, loved us so much, gave his son to us, Jesus Christ, right, Kim Jong-il. His body dies, but his spirit is with us forever and ever. Therefore, he knows how many here I have, what I think, what my future will be. So if we sacrifice ourselves right now for the revolution, we are gonna join him in the paradise afterlife. So North Korea, therefore, is number 1 Christian persecution country because it's so they copied it so like similarly. They cannot show it to North Korean people. There's some other ideology like that exists in other country. So that's why they don't also allow the religion in that way.
So you spent a lot of time when you were a kid completely on your own because your father was eventually put in a prison camp and for a long time. And then your mother spent a lot of time away from you because she had to do what she needed to do to raise money so that you could survive, but also she was trying to deal with the situation with your father. So you and your sister, how much age difference is there between you two?
3 years.
And she's older?
Yes, I was 8 years old and she was 11 years old.
And you spent a lot of time on your own. How, months?
Years. 3 to 4 years.
So what would tell me about a typical day and a typical week when you were on your own? So you'd get up in the morning. You said the roosters would crow. There's no electricity. The roosters would crow. You were living in a city at that time?
That time I was moving around a lot. So initially I was left alone with my sister when I was 8 years old, and 11 my sister. We were living like that for 2 years, and then our relatives separated us. Our uncle took my sister, and my aunt took me to the countryside. That's how I lived also on our 2 years like that way. And so my typical day is like, when the rooster like cries in the summertime, usually 5:30 a.m. and the winter time is 7 a.m. They're pretty accurate. So North Korea still cannot afford the clocks, and that's how we follow the, rooster, the timeline. We get up and we go to the mountains and do the daily work. We go, and the regime also assigned the children to raise rabbits at home. And then we skin them and give the skin to the regime so they can make the soldiers' coats with it. So everybody gets assignment with the regime. And also the thing is that they don't even have fertilizer. So they make sure that everybody bring their own bathroom stuff to the school. So tons of them. So even when you're a child, you get tons of assignments from the regime. Every single one of them associate to something and get your assignment and get it done collectively.
Yes, well, you said that as a school child, all of you and all of your friends, your peers, as well as the adults, were set out all the time to collect dog waste and human waste, and that was actually stolen from toilets because it was valuable. It had to be handed over to the state because that was the only source of fertilizer.
Yeah, so even that. So I remember one of my culture shock was when I was seeing the trash cans for the first time in my life. Because there was no trash can in North Korea. We literally had nothing to throw away. And coming to the West, where people are having these trash problems, it's like, where the heck am I? And in North Korea, even your own poop is so valuable that they fight for poop. It's like the war on poop. And if you don't bring the quota, you're going to be punished by the regime. So the kids is rather when they're in school, they don't study. They send out us to hunting for poops and everywhere and gather them, bring it to school afterwards.
Right. Well, that was one of the most striking parts of the book. I've read a fair bit about poverty-stricken existence under totalitarian regimes, but that was the first time I'd encountered that particular wrinkle, let's say. So, all right, so you're 8 years old and your sister is 11 and you get up with the roosters and you have work to do. What are you eating at that point? How much are you eating and where do you get your food?
It really depends. In North Korea, it's not when you eat, it's so random, like what you get that day. It's that's the thing. I never seen a cookbook. How do you find the half pounds of pork and flour and like scallion? Like we just eat whatever we have at that moment. So if that day we had potatoes who were like frozen outside because we didn't have a place to put them, then they becomes very dark colors. We cook them and we put lots of water in it and then some dried cabbage in it because, usually water fills you up. So a lot of food has a lot of soup in it in North Korea to fill you up. And, we make sure that we have enough food for the evening. We divide each meal. So depending on how much food we have that day, in the morning, I more like do the public distribution for each one of us. And how much you can eat per like certain meal. And some days we just cannot eat.
And who was distributing it?
My sister was the one more like chopping woods because she was bigger. She was doing more manual work and I was the one more like cooking and doing the domestic work.
And where was the food coming from? Apart from what you gathered?
Sometimes my mom, before she goes away like for several months, she leaves us with a few kilograms of corn and like other grains. Then we have to divide it for like 6 days. We don't know when she comes out or she will ever come back.
You told a story at one point about your mother leaving. I believe she was gone for several months, and she left you some money, and you and your sister spent it on sunflower seeds and something else,
Some cookie, yeah.
some cookies on the way back from where your mother left from, and then you had no money for all the time that she was gone.
Exactly. So we learned that lesson. The first time she left us, gave us some money, and then we never had those kind of money, big money in our hands. So on the way back, we bought sunflower seed and some cookies in the plastic bag. And then we had nothing left for us, and we were not even. So in North Korea, we don't even have phones. It's not like you can call up somebody. Where are you? Like a lot of times they go out and they never come back. They might die on disease or station, or accident. A lot of people never hear back from. So going on a journey in North Korea is like higher chances of you never seeing them again. And so even though mom would have said, I will come back, but we never knew she would. And once that happened, the first time we learned the lesson, mom would leave us a few kilograms of grains, then we would divide as much as we could. So we would not run out until she comes back.
And you said that all you ever thought about, and your sister as well, was food.
Mm-hmm.
And that you dreamed about bread, and you fantasized about bread, and you talked about how much bread you could conceivably eat, and that you were possessed all the time with hunger.
I know, I'm still thinking, as a child, I never ate till I felt full. So I never knew what was limits of my own stomach was. I never knew how much should I be fed so I feel full. So as a young man, I literally thought, if I even eat the mountains of food, I thought I would never feel full. So we would compare how much I can eat more. So my sister said, I'm 100, I'm 1,000, then a mountain and 10 million, and whatever the number, whoever comes up bigger. And that's how we were just dreaming of it. That was the only thing on your mind. So that's the thing. When people talk about the civilization, right? It falls when you don't eat. People become animals. You lose all this dignity. All you're thinking is just food, basic survivor. And that's what my people always dealing with, the basic survivor.
Yeah, and you were at that time too, you were seeing death everywhere as a consequence of starvation.
Mm-hmm. I still remember one day my sister and I walked by near the well. It's people bring the drinking water. There's a young man, I don't know, maybe teenager. He lies down and his intestines just comes out of him, and he was still alive. And I'm hungry, give me something. But as a young mind, I didn't even feel sorry. That's the thing haunts me the most, is that I feel nothing all my life there. And because every single thing I saw was like that, and now I'm thinking, was I a psychopath? How did I feel nothing about it? But that's thing so desensitized North Koreans are.
I think if you're in shock, you were in shock all the time. I mean, you said in many of the experiences you had, for example, that you felt like you were outside your body, watching, and that's a classic sign of dissociative stress. And you were in a situation like that all the time. So I don't think that you have to consult your conscience about that. It's in your book itself. There's no shortage of empathy on display. So, and I don't think it's a comment on your character. It's a comment on the absolute horror of the situation that you found yourself in. And obviously you were capable of great loyalty to your family members, and even to some of the people that treated you very, very badly. I mean, the men that you were involved with, in part, once you escaped from North Korea, you had ambivalent relationships with. But I mean, in some, you were able to see their humanity despite the terrible situation that you had been placed in by them. So I don't think there's any issue of you not having the full range of human feelings. It's just you were in situations that were so terrible that fortunately no one in the West essentially can even imagine being in a situation like that. None of us, to speak of, or a very small minority of us, have ever been hungry forever, let alone for any protracted period of time, and certainly not to the point of chronic malnutrition. That just doesn't happen here. And so, okay, so you lost your father was imprisoned when you were about 7 or 8. And what happened to him? What was the consequences for him? He was doing quite well in some sense by North Korean standards with his trading, so he was good at what he was doing, and your mother helped him. But he got imprisoned, especially after he moved up into more dangerous commodities. You said that he started to trade metals, and that he was hiding the metals in cars, railway cars that were reserved for I think I've got this right, for Kim Jong-il.
Yes.
Yes, and because they wouldn't be searched.
Yes. So every train in North Korea, we only have one train line, and that goes from one side of the country to the end. It sometimes takes a month to go because of low electricity, and the railways are very bad. And that's why there's always reserved one cargo that carries the things to Kim's from other
And what's
parts of
in
the
that
country.
car, just out of curiosity?
We hear these rumors. They grow the parts of the country that has the best land for growing apple or growing something, like the best of the best from the country that is especially reserved for them. And nobody actually really knows what's even in there. Even when those people who search that cargo cannot go, and the people who guards it, they have to do body search and health checkup for them. So that's how severe it's controlled. So really nobody knows what they're carrying inside. And my father was able to do something with them and then carry the metals in that cargo, hiding. And
he was bribing guards to allow that to happen.
Yeah.
And then he got caught.
Yeah.
And was put in so what kind, talk about the prison situations, because just normal life in North Korea is unbearable by all accounts, but the prisons take that to a whole new level of hell. So what would have your father experienced in a North Korean prison camp?
So there are 3 types of prisons in North Korea. One is called the Gwaliso. It is concentration camp. Usually you're born there. So let's say one day my grandfather committed some crime, then they take the older generation to there. And it is like a permanent living condition there. You live there forever for the rest of your life.
And you're born there. You can be born there because of the group guilt of your ancestors,
so
which never goes away.
Right. You can never redeem by your group, whatever your ancestors did. Forever you're there. So they don't even consider these inmates human enough. They don't even teach them who the leader is. They don't even know what Kim Jong-il is in that concentration camp. They are just.
You said they're not
animals.
even allowed to look at the guards.
Yes, but that is every level. So where my father went was a prison camp. But those people know what Kim Il-sung is. But the thing is, they too also treat them like animals. They don't let them to ever see the guard's eyes. And of course, the conditions are, it's a Holocaust, what the UN said. In 2014, the UN did a 3 years investigation, and the only resemblance that we found in our history is a Holocaust. This is a Holocaust happening in North Korea, again.
And do you have any idea how many people are in the concentration camps, the worst of the prisons? Do you know what the estimates are?
They say around 200,000.
And what about the total prison population? Do you have any numbers for that?
Because so many are dying, so when you go to the prison, a lot of them die within 3 months. So those numbers are very hard to get. And it's the most secretive country in the world. Even though the America cannot figure out North Korea. So we know that there are positions. We can even satellite seeing those public executions happening. But it's very hard to estimate how many going in and how many dying after 3 months. It's hard to calculate that numbers.
And so your father was in prison for how long?
He was sentenced to more than 10 years. Initially I thought it was 17 years, but North Korea showed the record. It was I think 11 year sentence, prison camp. He got out something 4 maybe years later for the sick leave, which means he was bribing. That's the thing.
Right, he played a trick on the ward.
Yes, right. So he thing called a sick leave. Once you get killed, you go back to prison again. And he was a very like a businessman. He lured like guards and get him out, and that's how he got him out during his sentence.
And so you saw your father again after a couple of years. How many years were you without him?
I think 4 years.
4 years.
I saw him again when I was 12.
Right, and you described that in the book. And so what did you see when you saw your father? What had happened to him?
So when I was reading this book by George Orwell in 1984, it talks about the man like Winston who had a lot of wits, and after that all the torture, he became empty, right? Like, and a lot of people like read that book as a fiction to them, but for me, that was like my father. When I saw my father again, of course, he had no hair. He just got out of prison camp. I mean, all he got was just bones, like literally skin on the bones. And the thing is, I didn't even feel anything. That's like what I'm still like guilty is like, I felt nothing. He was just so empty. His eyes were just hollow and empty. And then he was starting singing songs like, I didn't do enough for my country. Like he was so guilty that he was not a good revolutionary or whole. And it wasn't him. And in so many ways, that was worse than killing him. They killed his soul permanently, that he never came back. Until he died, he felt guilty that the crime that he committed for the regime. Till his deathbed, he told me never betray like the dear leader. And I don't know what he did to him, but he came out as a completely different person.
So it was not long after that you and your family decided to leave North Korea to escape. You were 13.
Yeah.
Your dad died.
Mm.
He died of cancer.
Yeah.
And it wasn't long after he got out of the prison that was the case.
Mm-hmm.
And then you guys decided to make your way to China.
No, I escaped actually. So my sister at 16, she escaped first with her friend. And I told you, as I got my stomach ache, she left me a note to say, go find this lady, she will help you to escape. Initially, I didn't plan to escape with my mom. I was going to escape with my own sister. But because I got sick, my sister had to leave first. I found the note and found the lady with my mom and told her that she told me if I go to China, she said I was going to find my sister.
Right.
And then, but when you're so desperate, like you don't even know what China is. Like we don't have internet to search and what's going on in China. Just hoping, because China is the only place that had the lights at night.
And if you look at North Korea from a satellite image, it's quite interesting because the entire country is black at night and it's surrounded by the bright lights of South Korea and all of Southeast Asia. But you have this immense territory, the whole north of Korea, that's completely dark. And you talked about standing with your boyfriend at that time, looking at the lights in the distance of China. But you didn't know anything about it at all and had no idea what was going to happen to you if you escaped into China.
No, I did not even know what was China. I just saw the lights, and maybe if I go where the lights were, I thought maybe I would find a bottle of rice. That's how innocently we thought about it. And
right, and some of that motivation was direct hunger, right? You were hoping to find somewhere where you could at least get enough to eat.
Yeah, it was. That's the thing. It's a thing when people say you're so brave that you risked your life for freedom. Like, no, I wasn't. I didn't even know what freedom was then. Like, how do I know what freedom is? And I just was literally escaping to find some food to survive from hunger. And that's how we crossed that frozen river that night with my mother and myself when I was 13 years old to China, leaving my father behind back in North Korea.
So tell us what happened. Tell us about what happens to North Koreans as they move with the traffickers into Korea, because that's a whole story in and of itself, and it was something you had no idea about.
I know, this is the thing, like the world is obsessed talking about slavery, but this is a slavery that's happening just right now at this very moment that we are talking about this. So there are like 300,000 North Korean defectors are in China, and they are all enslaved by Chinese people. I was one of them. In 2007, we found this lady. Miraculously, she wanted to help me to go to China. I didn't even know why. She bribed the guards. So in North Korea, it's the most heavily guarded border with the people with the machine guns. And Kim Jong-un literally buries landmines on the border, so people would not escape. So entire country is a concentration camp. Entire border is sealed. We were luckily bribed the guards. We crossed the frozen river to China. And of course, the first thing I see was my mom being raped in front of me.
And you said that your mother offered herself as an alternative to you.
Yeah.
And you were 13 at the time. And that was your first introduction to sex of any sort, because there was no sexual education or contact for young people. There was no sexual education and no romance, no dating, anything like that. So that was your first introduction. I don't imagine you even understood what was happening.
No, that's the thing. Like, I go there and I was like something 60 pounds. I was very malnourished, maybe 50 something, but so small. And this man was like, I want to have sex with her. And my mom's like, what do you mean? Like, she's only a child. And then he's like, I want to have sex with her. So she's like, just take me instead. And he was raping her in front of me. But I'm like, I just never seen a sex video ever. Never even knew what rape was. That word was not even in my head. I just seeing something so horrible that I didn't want to see. And after that, they took us to this house where they would like literally make us stand up, make us turn around, take our teeth and everything, and making price on our body.
Yeah, now let me fill in a bit of background there. So the way you lay that out in your autobiography is that there's a heavy demand for North Korean women in China, especially rural China. And the fundamental reason for that, apart from desire for labor, is that China instituted a one-child policy back in the 60s, and many female fetuses were more aborted than male. So there's a disproportionate number of young Chinese men who have no partner and no probability of acquiring one, because there's an absolute shortage of women. And so you and your mother were valuable commodities because of the shortage of women.
Exactly.
Yes,
so
I've got that right. And there was a price on, you both had a high value.
Yeah.
And that's when you entered what was essentially the world of slavery.
Mm-hmm. It's, as you said right now in China, literally 30 million young men has no hope of finding women in their life. 30 million men in China right now. So because of the regime, Chinese regime do not want these men to revolt, even because of dissatisfaction with their lifestyle. In a way, Chinese regime does not cracking down on this human right trafficking either. We are almost like the price they are using to pay for this men not to revolt. And then, so when we go, I was 13 years old, I was a virgin. So my price would be less than $300. In 2007, and my mom's price was less than $100. That's how little a human being worth right now in this 21st century. And then each trafficker buys us, price goes up. So the second trafficker comes and buys us and then pay more price. Then they sell us to the Chinese farmers or the men, or to sell us to brothels or prostitution and like a lot of other like underground world, and sell us like products like commodity. And then I remember that's the thing, like at 13 they were asking, so in China in order to be here you gotta be sold. And I didn't even know what human trafficking was. Like, what do you mean you're selling a human? I'm not a puppy, like how do you sell me? And they were like, no, you gotta be sold here. And they said like literally to me was that, well, if you don't want to be sold, you can go back to North Korea. We can let you guys go back. But the thing is, going back to North Korea is a death. Like, even though miraculously regime doesn't punish me, there's no chance for me to find food. And that's the hardest thing. It's like there's no place for us to go. outside of North Korea. Like if we leave that country, whatever the condition is, it's better than being in North Korea, because at least in China we are being fed. Doesn't matter we are raped, tortured, we are at least being fed. And that's how we stayed in China and they sold me separately from my mom, because they can charge two people's price. So they sold my mom and sold me separately, and that's how I got separated from all my family at 13.
Yeah, well, you said at the beginning when you went into China that you didn't tell the smugglers, the traffickers, that you were traveling with your mother. Mm-hmm. You said that she was younger than she was, and you said that you were older than you were.
Exactly.
Because they weren't going to take you otherwise.
Yeah, so the lady...
And you had no idea what was in store for you at that point also?
No, I did not know. She told me, oh, don't tell them you guys are mother and daughters, just say you're maybe aunt or something. And told my mom, you're much younger, you're much older. And because human trafficking was something that I didn't hear about in my life, I was so scared, because in North Korea, there's no bad news. Every news is a happy news, how amazing we are winning in the revolution. So I never even knew what rape was. In America, if you watch news, like somebody raped, you know what rape is. But in North Korea, they steal every information from you. Like news is not actual news. So not knowing what rape is, not knowing what human trafficking is, and just completely into another like planet.
But you had enough to eat.
Yeah.
And was that the first time in your life that you'd actually had enough to eat? Were you able to find enough so that you could eat until you were full? Did you experience that at that point?
That's when I learned. Another thing is, it didn't matter that I had food to eat again, because I lost everything that mattered to me. Like I lost everything, and so I wanted to kill myself. Like I finally went to the place where there was a food for me, but then that means me being a slave, and I'm losing every single one of them in my life, and I was going to kill myself. And at that point, this broker told me, if you help me become my mistress, help me with my trafficking business, that I'm going to help you with your own family.
Why did you decide to stay alive? What kept you going?
Because my mother, he told me at that point, he said, if I don't kill myself and helping him, then he said he was going to buy my mom, because he's the one who sold my mom to a farmer.
Right. So at that point you were separated, and your mother was the enslaved wife, so to speak, of a farmer in a rural community.
Yes.
So she had to be bought back, and that's the deal he offered you.
Yes.
And so you decided to stay alive because you thought you could help your mother.
Yeah.
It wasn't for you.
No, I was, yeah, it was my life mattered something, right? It meant something. I could do something more than that. So he offered to bring my father, and that's how I brought my father to China from North Korea. And that October, when I was turning 14, in that October 2007, I saw my father again. And
so then you were with this man, Hong Wei, was that his name? Hong Wei.
Mm-hmm.
And you describe a very complex relationship with him. He was violent and a gambler, so he would spend vast amounts of money raised by this trafficking trade and disperse all of it in gambling fits. And he was violent to you, but you also believed that over time he came to love you. And so what do you make of that in retrospect? It's an unbelievably complicated situation, to say the least.
Even though actually it's a thing, last year he came out of prison in China after 10 years serving sentence, and I sent him money from the US to help him. And it was for me too. That's the thing. And then I could actually, this morning I woke up from this nightmare of my time with him, how violent he was. All my day I was was hard of all those nightmares I went through. But the thing is, nobody's pure evil. Nobody's pure anger. And I think that's what it is. Like, as much as he was so evil, I'm still haunted by nightmares. He still saved my parents. He still gave my father's last moment that I can cherish. And I think that's life, really. It's not that simple. Yeah.
So you were with him for how long?
2 years.
And what occurred after that? You went to Mongolia. What was the trek from him? Now, so he brought your mother back, and so you're together living with him, you and your mother?
Yes.
You can't find your sister yet at that point.
No, we couldn't find my sister.
Your father, is he still alive at that point when you're with Hong Wei?
So, yes, during the time, after finding my mom, he brought my father 6 months later. And then my father died 3 months later, after I saw him again.
And you said you had changed dramatically after you left North Korea. You stopped being a child very, very rapidly. Right? And
Yeah.
you started to take care of your mother and to make the decisions. And also when your father saw you, once he came to China, that he could hardly recognize you.
It still affects me. I think that at 13, I don't know what I became. It took so hard for me to fear something again. Like when I had my own son, actually in 2018, when I met you at the lecture, that is the year when I for the first time felt something. And like I was so grateful that I was feeling things ever again. And so at 13, I learned how not to fear ever. And I don't know how it was possible even. So my father came and then he died. So I buried his ashes in the middle of the mountain. And after that, Hong is like he blew all his money from gambling. He couldn't even have.
You said when your father did come, though, you did revert to being a child from time to time, that you would sit on his lap and that you would turn back into a younger child and then go back into whoever you had become when you went to China.
Yeah. I think there were many versions of me back then to survive. Whatever the version that was fitting me to survive, I think I became that person. It was so complex. I don't even know like am I, which person am I? Like I became so many persons. I still think I just don't even know how that was possible. So because my father before he died, like he was keep telling me about his childhood. And I think he just really missed me being a child. And I think something like brought that out of me. So my father is very hard thing for me to still deal with. But so he died and then Hongwei couldn't afford to have us. He couldn't even able to buy us even food in China. That's really bad. He couldn't even able to feed us. So he was saying, okay, I'm not gonna let you go. Then how do we go? Where do we go? Even though
your mother at that point, she was insisting that you sell her again, if I remember correct.
Yeah, I did sell my mom because I couldn't feed her. She was saying only way for me to feed in China was being sold again. So I sold my own mom and then gave the money to Hongwei, and then he blew us in a one night gambling. So a few months later, I brought my mom, make her to run away from the farmer that I sold her. And then we luckily found a North Korean lady who operates in a chat room. I don't know you know this. They bring these girls. So it was better than brothel. That's the thing. I had the option of going to prostitution or going to a chat room at 14. And I thought it's much better than being touched by men physically than going to a chat room.
Well, you said that with Hong Wei that, that was your introduction to sex essentially, and that it was catastrophic for you. And so, well, and then you, after Hong Wei could no longer afford to feed everyone, that's when you entered the chat rooms. And you were working in the chat rooms for how long?
Maybe over half a year, maybe less than a year. I think so, like 8 months or 9 month time. So
and the people that organized the chat rooms took the vast proportion of the money.
Oh, yes, all the money.
I think you got $1 out of 7, was something like that.
Something like, but even that dollar, we had to buy food and clothes and other things. So, but the thing is, still was better there than going into prostitution. And in that chat room, we met another North Korean fellow defector, and then she told me there was way out of all this, which means going to South Korea. And then they say, I told them, what do you mean South Korea? I thought South Korea was colonized by America. It's like the horrible capitalistic corrupt country. And she was like, no, South Korea is free. And that is, I remember still the time I learned the word free that day. I was asking her, what do you mean I'm gonna be free in South Korea? And she, of course, did not know freedom meant freedom of speech. None of that. She literally told me, oh, in South Korea, you can wear jeans and you can watch TV and no one gonna be arresting you for that. And that's how we conceived the freedom as North Koreans. Like freedom meant wearing jeans. So I asked her, then how do I do that? And then she was saying, oh, then we gotta become Christians. There were Christian like operation in China. If we become Christians, they were going to help us. And it was so ironic for me, or why? Because I couldn't believe, like, why do we have to keep believing something to survive? In North Korea, we had to believe in Kims. But now, suddenly outside North Korea, we had to believe in God to survive. But the thing is, we are so desperate. Like, literally, if somebody took me or brought me like a rock, asked me to believe in rock, I would have believed. That is like how strong our humans will to survive.
And the Christians that you became associated with in China, were those Chinese Christians or were they missionaries from Western countries?
Both. They were
both.
Some of them from South Korea and some of them from China. And they would have these houses that make us to study Bible. And if we prove our faith to them, they then help us to go to South Korea. And that was a deal that we become Christians and they were going to help us. So at 15, I became a Christian. They made us to go fasting. I mean, like we were like managed all our life, but they said God can do more than that. So they go us like fasting. We did a 3-year-old child in our group, a toddler. We go fasting and make us memorize Bible verses, and they come check us like if we memorize it or not.
How do you view that interaction with the Christians in China in retrospect? Was there any of that was useful, or was it just another belief that you had to adopt to survive?
So truly, honestly, Dr. Peterson, until I read your book, 12 Rules for Life, I was atheist. I was so against religion because right now I'm with Christians at 15 studying Bible, and then they found out about what I did to survive in China. And
the chat rooms. Yes,
and I remember the pastor was saying, "You're so dirty, like it can never be washed," and he literally. Like some Corinthians, some verse telling me that how some sins can never be washed. And how I was so dirty for doing what I did to survive. And that was actually a lot harder in some ways to going through all that journey, because when I was at least going through it, I didn't think that was a bad thing. I thought like something you have to do to survive. Because my father always told me life was a gift. You have to fight for it no matter what, how hard it is. You should never give up on like life. And then I'm suddenly now with this missionary telling me what I did was wrong. I should have like died instead of doing something that dirty to survive. So it was very tough to deal with, like keep thinking for the rest of my life, was it worth it?
Well, but also you were at that point too. You said that the reason that you didn't kill yourself was because you wanted to help your mother. You had other people that were dependent on you. It wasn't just you.
Mm-hmm.
And you were still looking for your sister too. You had no idea what had happened to her at that point.
Yeah, I didn't. So, yeah, but the thing is now what I'm thinking of that, no matter what he was better than those people talking about inclusion, all of that, because he risked his life to saving lives. those pastors, those missionaries who sent to prison for lifetime sentence in China. No matter what people are saying, like you gotta see their actions. And these people actually cared about humanity than anybody that I met having all this flowery, loving language they are using. So that's the thing, like it's so hard to understand humanity that even though it hurt me so long, I'm like forever grateful for what he did for us. And namelessly, I'm like, I made a name for myself. If I'm dying, people gonna know, but he never did. And he didn't even tell me his name. We asked him, like, tell us your name so we can at least thank you afterwards. Like, no, it's not, I'm doing this for making a name. I'm doing this because of love. Love for Jesus, that he loved us. That's why I'm loving you guys so much. So in a way that he was the only person who showed me with the actions that humans can love one another, that like unconditionally. So it's just very complex.
So it was his group that took you and your mother to Mongolia?
They told us how to go to Mongolia because in desert, there's no way you can make it out. It's like it's a random luck. It's a pure luck. That's why I think maybe they were more religious. They were waiting for God's sign to send us because it's not like guide taking us. If you getting into the Gobi Desert, most of chances, like mostly you're never gonna be found by any human being on earth.
So you decided that you would just go into the desert and take your chances.
Yeah. So
and that was you and your mom.
And then we have 5 other people in our group and 1 baby with us. So it was a 8 people group. And then they told us, go follow northwest direction with 1 compass. And then if you cross 8 wire fences, hopefully that's going to be Mongolia for you. It's a random chance of taking the luck.
And so why was Mongolia a reasonable target, or were you just out of options?
Because it didn't cost money. If we wanted to go to other countries like Thailand, we had to pay the brokers. But we didn't have money. So Mongolia was by walking, we crossing the walks. When you walk, you don't pay anybody. So now really nobody escaped through Mongolia because it's too dangerous. Now most of the factors escaping through Thailand, but we were the last people who ever crossed the desert to make it successfully.
So what happened in Mongolia? You did run across authorities.
Yes, we did. How
long were you in the desert?
We were actually only there 1 day, but it was 2009 in February, minus 40 degrees.
Minus 40?
Yes, in desert. It's below Siberia, so usually guards would think like nobody's crazy enough to cross desert right now in this temperature because you can die like within a few minutes if you don't move in desert for even 10 seconds, you're frozen there. You are constantly moving every second.
And you said you had almost no clothing at that point because they told you to pack light.
Mm-hmm. Like my mom.
How come you didn't freeze? I mean, minus 40 is unbelievably cold.
Yeah, that's a miracle. Life is a miracle. It's like some things you cannot explain in a human way. It's just like people say it's a luck. Maybe you can say it's a luck. I don't know. I remember like everything was frozen and we didn't even have gloves or scarves. That's the thing. And now I'm like complaining how cold Chicago is. Like, no, we were wearing this bare, no snow jackets, none of that. And all I remember was we reminding each other we gotta keep moving because when you're frozen, it gets very sleepy and like you're losing a lot of senses. And then maybe you wanna rest, and then we were reminding each other, no, we gotta keep going, like dragging each other, moving. Every second counts. We gotta move.
And did all 8 of you make it, and the baby as well?
We made it because initially we have to drug the baby. If the baby cries, the guard's gonna hear us. So we would give him the sleeping pill to make him sleep. But sleeping in that frozen like weather is so dangerous thing. So we have to constantly waking him up, like passing around between people to keep him awake. And he made it too.
Huh. So you were you were picked up by the authorities and you were put in a holding camp, essentially.
Yeah.
It didn't seem, compared to many of the other things that you had been through, it didn't seem as awful. Is that reasonable? So tell us about that.
So the thing was in Mongolia, it wasn't something, physical hardships we went through so much, it doesn't matter. But the thing is, they were, this is the thing. Later we learned, like, so Mongolia, they wanted to send us to North Korean side, to the Chinese side, and then send us back to North Korea. So we literally brought the lasers and like poison syringes to kill ourselves in front of them. And we thought like they were sending us to China side. But later we learned that these soldiers had never intention, but they loved looking at our reactions, how we would react.
Really?
And yeah, that's the thing.
Jesus. It's so
pure.
Unbelievable.
I know. It's like literally, I remember like trying to call myself with a laser, tell my mom like, we did everything we could to make it. And luckily they stopped us right before we cut ourselves. But the team who came after us, they went too far, so she didn't swallow the poison. And then they took her to hospital and she became like mentally like lost a lot of her senses afterwards. So it was a game for a lot of people, like teasing us, seeing someone like. And I think that's like those very hard to at this point, like to try to make sense of like being a human, like, it's just so hard to know this is like the same life that I've been having. It wasn't like some dream or something.
So you were, after that, you were reasonably treated in Mongolia, but you were also subject to a lot of interrogation.
Yeah.
And why was that?
Because one is they try to screen the spies out, because North Korea sends a lot of spies disguising as defectors and send them, so they can assassinate like me, someone who speaks out, or get information who my relatives are and then send back to North Korea so they can punish the family members of the defectors. So a lot of defectors, just like spies can do. But not only that, South Korea also had a very like heavy discrimination towards North Koreans. And the country is still they blame the victims when it comes like the rape. There's like, because of you got raped, not the men. So I remember like during my interrogation, he asked me like, do you have tattoo in your body? And I was 15 years old. And I was like, no, I don't have tattoos. Like, are you
They
sure?
were looking for marks that would prove that you were engaged in prostitution.
Exactly. So I was like, no. And it's like, I'm going to take off your clothes here. Like, are you sure? It's like, yeah. And that's when I realized, like, really, like, there was no angel at all. Like, there's nothing better country. Like, of course, there's all degree of bad and good. And South Korea actually is another hard place for North Koreans to adjust. And like 2 years ago, there was a mother and son died in the middle of Seoul, South Korea, from starvation because of the ignorance from South Korean public towards them. They died from starvation in the middle of like capital of Seoul. South Korea.
So you went through this lengthy interrogation process in Mongolia, and then it was decided, and your mother was with you, and it was decided at that point that you were genuine refugees, and you made it from there to South Korea.
Yeah.
And was that to Seoul?
From Mongolia, several months interrogation, they take us to another 2 months of the interrogation at the South Korea's intelligence facility. Then they take us to 3 months of re-education program.
Right, and that's when they taught you how to be integrated to some degree into South Korean culture. So talk about that too. That's very interesting.
Yeah, so they give us this 3 months of training periods where they introduce us to this new planet.
And then that's once they've identified you as genuine refugees.
Exactly.
So then you got in that stream.
Yeah. Once they're proven, sometimes they even go through those like lie detectors with other defectors. They really make sure that you're not a spy and saying everything is true. Once that is proven, they put us this 3 months of training period where they tell us what bank is, right? As North Korea, we never know what bank or ATM machine is. They tell us like how to ride a bus, how to ride a subway, you know, like the
What did you think of all that? I mean, you'd been in China for some time, so this wasn't the difference between North Korea and other countries wasn't quite as shocking, I presume. But what was happening to you when you started to understand the massive difference between North Korea and the rest of the world, and also the fact that everything that you had been taught since you were born and everything your parents had been taught, all of that was, every single bit of it was a lie. What was that doing to you?
That was the thing, like as you said. I remember they said, oh, Korean were started by Kim Il-sung, not by Americans. And like in North Korea, literally they tell us Americans are bastards, they are the most evil thing, right? And at that point, my reaction was, so if everything that I believe was a lie, how do I know that what you're saying is not a lie? Like, how do I ever trust ever again? And it was the hardest thing ever trusting ever. It took many years, and when I read by George Orwell's book, The Animal Farm, that's when I realized, oh, what they're telling is actually true. But until that point, I didn't trust what South Koreans were saying.
Why was George Orwell's book so relevant to you? Why did it have that effect? Do you know?
So I was reading this Animal Farm, not even knowing what that is, and I was seeing my grandmother in those old pigs and these young pigs. When they like later, when those young pigs born, they don't even know what life was beforehand. They didn't even know the alternative life looks like, right? Because the first pigs were afraid to speak out, and all the terror, they kept silent. So until I was reading that book, I was only blaming the Kim dictatorship because of the dictatorship that we suffered. But when I was reading that book, I could see all those people were voluntarily, involuntarily supporting in this dictatorship. By terror, they were silenced, but it was their fault too that we end up in this. Everybody did something, contribute something, make us North Korea into, the perfect dystopia that we are reading in the book.
Contributing what? What do they contribute?
By keeping silence.
By keeping silent?
Yes.
When they had something to say?
Exactly, because when it came to me, doctor, like, I didn't even know the word oppression. So if you know you're oppressed, you're not oppressed. But to me, like in North Korean young generation, we don't even know we're oppressed. What is that? But my grandmother knew. She experienced before Kim. She lived through Japanese colonialism. Like she lived through before Kim's. But because of that, their fear of losing their life and the loved ones, I'm sure they had a reason like not to speak up. But because of the fear and not standing up for the right, just now North Korea in a point where people don't even know what life can be look like.
Well, Solzhenitsyn was convinced that a totalitarian state could not exist unless everyone was participating in the lie, and that the most potent anti-authoritarian action is to tell the truth. And that means to say something when you have something to say, because not because you're brave, but because the alternative is worse.
Yeah, that's...
And it was Orwell. It's so interesting to me that it was Orwell that opened your eyes to that. I mean, it makes perfect sense, but it's still really something.
Yeah, I know. It's like that book. I think that's when I realized, everybody was responsible, and that's when I started thinking about speaking out.
That's when you started thinking about speaking out. Yeah. I see. Mm-hmm. And so you made a conscious decision at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I
knew Why?
Because I knew the price of silence. Because like that was the price we were paying, right? Like not even knowing. Like that's the thing. Like when people say, like, "Why no revolutions?" Like because we don't know we are slaves in North Korea. How do you fight to be free when you don't know you're a slave? And that's a different thing. Like the fact that people don't even know they're oppressed. That's the thing. Like what kills me to this point about my father is not like of course I would be grateful he ever lived in freedom even one day. But the heartbreaking thing is he didn't even know life could be this free and life could be this beautiful. He didn't even know that. Like, life could be so different for other human beings. I just wish he knew before he goes, so he doesn't remember this life so hard is filled with the sadness, And that's the thing with North Koreans, we are talking with different degree of oppression. They don't even know life can be this way. And yeah, so that was my time of understanding what happened and started believing in this freedom.
So you're in the re-education process in South Korea, learning to be a South Korean, learning to some degree how to fit in the culture, learning to some degree how to be free.
Yeah.
Did you start reading at that point, or for example, when did you encounter Orwell? Was that when you went to university later?
Before my university, so when I was 16, I think, 16 years old.
And how did you come across the book?
It was, so I was in this de facto school because I was 15 years old, almost 16 years old. They did a placement exam for me. And as you said, like, I don't even know the map of the world. My grade came out like 7 years old, like intelligence.
Right, so you got out of the re-education process, and then you lived. Where did you live with your mother after you left the re-education process?
They put some in like a public housing in the countryside where a lot of mentally ill people were living.
And then that's when you decided that you were going to go back to school.
Yes, that's where I wanted to go to school. But then if I want to go to school, there's no way I can be studying with 7 years old. But even though a lot of defectors do that, they start studying with 7 years old in the same classroom. And I want to take a GED, so I would catch up quickly. And I went to special defector school where they would help us studying in a GED. And in the bookshelf, there was this tiny book called like The Animal Farm, and I picked it up because it looked very thin. Not big. I was like, it might be easy, quick read. And never knew that was the point where my life was going to be changed.
That's really something. So then you went to school, and
yes.
you had to convince the authorities to support your desire to be educated. Your plan was to go to university. How in the world did you formulate that plan? How did you even find out about university? I mean, I guess you knew that already in North Korea. You knew that already. But why did you decide that you needed to go to university? What was driving you?
It was, so I remember like they were asking me, what do you want to do after like kids here, after the re-education, what do you want to do? And I told them like, I want to go study. And it's like, why? Like studying, like South Korea is the most competitive countries and when it comes to education, how are you going to compete? There's no chance for you to survive. I wasn't even speaking ABCD alphabet English at that time as an adult. So, but I don't know, that's the thing, something was in me, was thirst for knowledge that I always knew that I wanted to study. I wanted to learn how the world worked. So I kept that and keep getting back to books. I was reading like 100 books a year. But also the reason I was reading books is like because there's such a high discrimination. Nobody wanted to be friends with North Koreans anymore in South Korea. And everybody told me that I was a failure before even I began. It's like, you are never going to be competing. You're never going to be win this competition. So only the books were the ones telling me that I could do it.
The books were? Yeah,
only the books were telling me, because every book tells you can do it, right? But everybody, the human being I met was telling me I couldn't do it. So I just keep reading books. Yes,
well, you can make contact with great minds that encourage you through books. And thank God for that, right? Yeah, that's what they're for.
Mm-hmm.
So, so you got your high school equivalency. And how long did that take you?
I had to do from the elementary to high school. So it took like over just 1 year.
1 year. You did all that in 1 year.
Yeah. So I went to college at 17.
At 17. So you passed your G, and you'd only had 2 years of education in North Korea, but most of that time you were like working at manual labor.
Yes, yes.
Now how was your reading ability in Northern Korea? Were you already literate?
No, a little bit, but then also the vocabularies were so different in South Korea. Like like we don't know what shopping mall is because we don't know shopping, right? Like what's a supermarket? What is dry cleaning? So I had to like write down, like it wasn't like English to South Korea was easier because I already knew the concept. But like learning about gay, even I met somebody gay and he hugged me and he told me, "Baby, don't worry, I'm gay." And then like what gay is? Understanding a concept takes way longer than learning a language. So that took longer for me because it's exactly the 1984, the Georgia where it talks about doublespeak, who controls the language, who controls thoughts. So North Korea purposefully eliminated the words like stress, because how can you be stressed in the socialist paradise? So they get rid of stress, they get rid of depression, they get rid of trauma, they get rid of all these concepts that people know here, we don't have in North Korea. So I think that was very challenging than even learning new language.
So is it fair to say that you taught yourself to read and you got your GED equivalent? You did that in 1 year, and so you were ready to go to university at the age of... How in the world did you do that? How much time were you spending every day studying?
I didn't, so that was a funny story. I ended up in the ER. And then like they were saying, "You're malnourished," because I didn't have time to eat. I forgot to eat. So even when I was sleeping, I would turn on the like a TED Talks or NPR so I can like listen. My brain still kept working. And even when I was sleeping, I would put the books behind my pillow so the like knowledge would go into me. I was obsessed. I was crazy.
You were obsessed with...
Yeah, I was completely obsessed with learning.
And how did you manage to survive economically during this time? How did your mom and you make money? I know you got some money from the South Korean government, right? Mm-hmm. Was that enough to get you through that first year, or what happened? No.
They give for the 6 months. They help you to pay your cell phone bills and the house like the amenities, right? You pay the utility bills, but after 6 months, you are on your own.
So you're completely obsessed with studying to the point where you're not even eating. And we should also just stress here, it is definitely the case that the education process is unbelievably competitive in South Korea, as you've already pointed out, far and above what people young people in North America can imagine, or in Europe for that matter. And so you were facing very, very heavy competition. So, but you got obsessed to the point where you weren't even eating. That's amazing, because I would have thought that you would be more motivated to eat after what you've been through than virtually, but you were hungrier for knowledge than for food, and you had been starved of both.
Exactly. I was working at this, I don't know, you know, something called Daiso. It's like a $1 store in South Korea, the Japanese branch. So I was working there as a part-time job, and I was minor. So my mom had to give the authorization that she would let me work. And then I was working this wedding horse, like serving food as a waitress. So I was working, and then my mom was also doing the dishes and helping me. And I was living in these rooms in Seoul because I was studying where underground, I didn't even have a window. And I still remember those times. I was so happy because I had a goal. Like I was, like this tiny room where you can just stretch your feet like barely. I'm like 5'2", I'm tiny. In that room, I was like living there. All I had was books with me and dream.
Yeah, well, a room full of books isn't small.
Exactly, it was large, yeah.
Yeah, right, absolutely. Mm-hmm. So you got your GED, and then you applied to university in a competitive program, and there was still trouble with you getting in, but you managed it. How did you manage it, and how did you decide what you were going to do?
I was going to study criminal justice. I saw so much injustice, and even in South Korea, I saw so much of it. I really wanted to understand how that worked. How what this thing is called justice. So I'm grateful they gave me opportunity to study that program. But now it's just such a like, I don't know how I was going through all of that, but somehow back then I had a drive that I never even knew I had.
And so you were at the university for how long? 4 years? Was it a 4-year degree?
It was 4 years degree, but I only did 3 years and a half. Before my last semester, I went to Columbia University in New York and switched my major there.
Okay. Now, in Korea, was that at the same time you were also working at a Korean television station?
Exactly.
Okay, so
yes.
there's a bit of a detour there. You were cast in some sense as the North Korean Paris Hilton.
Yes.
So that's extraordinarily bizarre. So tell me about that. What happened?
Now I'm studying criminal justice in a top university, very competitive program, doing this physical training to become an intelligence officer later. And then I get a call from TV producer saying they are trying to make a show, because until that point, North Korea was portrayed as very just heartbreaking documentary. People with like looks like robots when their dear leader dies, wailing, looks very inhuman. But they wanted to make a show, entertainment show, not a documentary, entertainment show, bring young girls they thought was pretty, putting in a beautiful designer clothes and studio, put them in a makeup, and then talk about their life in a lively. So their show motto was chat with beautiful ladies. And they had that before, beauties from the Russia, Poland, America. Now they are going to do that with North Korean young girls. I didn't want to go on. I was like, no, of course I'm not. But then they told me, South Korean shows are super popular in China and all other East Asias. Because you lost your sister, your sister might be able to see it and then find you in South Korea. But because before that I was looking for my sister on a one educational program, and they saw me there and then found me, and they knew that talking about my sister was gonna get me. So that was a thing. That was a deal for me to go on the show and talk about my sister, and hopefully she sees it and come to me, because I was still looking for her. But the thing is, because I told them about my father's black market business before his arrest, they thought, and of course, how do I know who Paris Hilton is? I don't know. But they needed a character for each character in the show business. That's what they say. You cannot be complicated. You gotta be one simple thing. Everybody gotta have characters, and then they name you. So I was going into out of nowhere to show business. It is unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. Well, it's also unbelievable the role that you were cast in. It has such a it's such a contrast with what actually, with what the reality of your life in North Korea really was.
But the thing is, in that show, I learned actually what I went through was nothing. Doctor, I was in a way of some sense of Paris Hilton, because they went through literally cannibalism is a real thing in North Korea. And I would not want to, people say, oh, don't dehumanize the subject. Why are you talking about those things? But what I went through wasn't even close to what other people went through. And what my sister went through in China, who decided to never ever talk about ever again in her life, in that 7 years, what I went through was nothing. That 3 years of being on the show and hearing how other people managed to survive made me was like, oh my gosh, I had it so easy. I'm so grateful. I feel so grateful. I still to this day, I don't know how I got that lucky.
So you're taking criminology and you're 3 years in and you're doing this TV show on the side, and you discover your sister.
Yeah. She did come to South Korea and she saw the show. Eventually, she did.
And you were reunited with her in South Korea.
Yes, she did. I found her when I was 20 years old, seven
And
years
do
later.
you see each other now?
Now my sister is a teacher in South Korea, and we see each other often, but because we live in a different country, I'm in America, she's in South Korea.
Right, but you have a familial relationship.
Oh.
It's just distant.
Definitely, yes.
Okay, so now you said that you ranked 30th, I think, out of 94 students in the program.
Yeah.
So you were able to hold your own against the intense competition.
Yes, I did my best.
Yes, apparently.
Yeah.
And then, so how in the world did you end up at Columbia? Now, you don't write about that. Do you write about that? Did I miss that?
No, I didn't write it because it was after.
Okay. So now we're getting to the point. This is past. So I just remind everybody that we've gone over some of the details that characterize this autobiography, In Order to Live. So now we're moving a bit past it because it was published in 2015. So there's been 6 years, six intermediating years. So how in the world did you end up at Columbia? What happened?
So one day I have a friend in America told me, do you want to go to this conference called like the Youth Leaders Gathering in Ireland? And in South Korea in 2014, I never even been to Europe. And I don't even know what Ireland is. I thought it was somewhere like in UK or something. And then they say, if you participate, they would pay your flight and lodging for free. Every South Korean student's like dream is going to backpacking in Europe. So it's like, oh my God, I got this once a lifetime to go to Europe for free in my college. And then, so this is a conference called the One Young World. They bring the youth leaders from every country. So they called the North Korean embassy in the UK saying, can you send a delegation to us? And we just need 2 delegates from each country. And North Korea regime told them, no, because they have to spy on each other, we can only send 3. So they said, okay, how about we sponsor 2 and then you guys sponsor 1 so we can bring 3. And then North Korea said, no, thank you. And that's also, okay, then we're going to look for defectors because they didn't want to sponsor for 3 people. That's how they found me, through my friends. So in that conference, I applied to become a delegate speaker along with other 34 delegate speakers. I was just a really average person. And then I did a lot of 3 times like the interview with them. I selected as a speaker at the end, and many speakers together. And there I shared about what was happening to my people in China, how the Chinese role on, being silent and still they are allowing this human trafficking happening, right? Like if you see the girls captured by Taliban, like Michelle Obama, have no problem standing up for girls captured by Boko Haram. So many people talk about these girls, but when it comes to North Korean girls, nobody talks about it because they don't want to upset Chinese regime. So my speech in that conference really became vital. And that's
what you focused on in that speech.
Yes, I was only focusing on the women's, what we are going through in China. And I didn't even plan to be that speech go to viral. Nobody can plan it. It was a pure accident. I was in the middle of university attending. I had to go back to Korea too. But that speech became very viral. And then I got a book offer from Penguin Random House. And then my agent was in New York. That's how I went to New York. But while I was writing the book, I always loved learning, so I wanted to study. I want to continue my study, and they told me there was a university in New York called the Columbia. So that's how I applied there and then went there to study.
And did you finish your undergraduate there? Or did you do an advanced degree? You finished your undergraduate then?
I did undergrad 4 years there. So I did almost 8 years of bachelor. Okay,
and so you'd gone to university and came out of North Korea. Then you went to university in South Korea. So you got to see that culture as an outsider. Mm-hmm. And then you came to the United States and you got to see Columbia University. So what did you conclude about your time in Columbia University? What were your impressions? What do you have to say to people about what you saw?
Oh my gosh. So that 4 years from 2016 to 2020, it was a complete madness. I became very pessimistic about the Western world after university, because like so literally in these humanity classes, even the economics, I was studying economics for 2 years and later human rights. The professor would send me the emails. Oh, this class we're gonna cover this. If it triggers you, you don't have to come to the class or don't even do the reading. I'm a rape survivor. I'm a slave. I gone through so many things, and they say, oh, this can trigger the rape. This can trigger this, and then before the class they say, let's go through what do you want to be called, your pronouns. And my English is not that good. I sometimes mistakenly call him or she, and then they start asking me to say they, and then I don't know how to incorporate in my English that pronoun properly. And it made me so nervous to talk in the classroom. And one day I got into a fight with my professor. She was saying, the fact that you're letting men holding door for you is you are giving in to their overpowering you. And I was like, no, isn't it kindness? Is it decency? I hold the door for people too. It's not like I'm trying to signal that I'm powerful than you. And she was like, Yeonmi, you're so brainwashed from North Korea. And I was a scenario, of course my GPA is gonna be affected, and it's like, okay, I gotta really shut up. I gotta try to do my best to get a good GPA. So that 4 years, I learned to censor myself all over again. And it became ridiculous.
That's terrible.
Exactly, I literally risked my life to say what I think is right. And now I'm in a country where I 4 years of time try how to create a safe space and be sensitive enough. So, and where am I? And it gave me a lot of chaos. Did I become free? Where am I? Is there any truly free place in this world right now?
Well, okay, so you were in this university in Korea, and Korean universities are intense. And so
Yes.
how would you contrast the quality of the education that you received, and they're very Western influenced, the South Korean universities. So they're a product of the Western university system. So how would you contrast your experience at the South Korean university with Columbia, which is in principle one of the great Western American institutions, educational institutions?
So I do think South Korea is way more technical. They are way more into trying to teach you the skill set. If, more giving you actual knowledge. But okay, I think Americans are very obsessed. That was my impression at Columbia. We're really trying to help you how to think. But almost you want to shape how you think. They are very into shaping your minds, how you think about something. In South Korean study program was more oh, this is a fact, this is what happened in history, this is what we're gonna do, this is a model we're gonna apply to solve this criminal case. This is how things work. But lately though, when it comes to sociology, it's been very influenced by the Western, the mainstream education. So a lot of anti-Western sentiments was definitely there. And it's just
In Korea as well.
Oh yes, definitely. All those sociology and those subjects is definitely influenced. And South Korea is now becoming a communist again. Definitely, it is a sad trend to see that like right now South Korean youth demand socialism, and freedom is so fragile, like it's never gonna be there if you don't fight for it. And South Korea's democracy is falling, and their freedom of speech right now in South Korea, like doctor, if you send those leaflets that we used to send to North Korea to free people's minds. So we used to send those leaflets about like you Kims are dictators, you are being lied. And that was a freedom self-expression that was covered by South Korean constitution. But now that just became criminalized in South Korea, like last few months ago.
What exactly was criminalized?
Advocating freedom in North Korea. Because South Korea, but their defense is that because if we say we support freedom in North Korea, then North Korean regime saying we are going to start a war over you about that. So for the protecting South Korean people's freedom, you cannot advocate freedom for North Korean people in the South Korea.
And what do you think about?
This is another thing. There's gonna be a price for being silent about something like this happening, right? It's if they can come for this, well, how do we know they're not gonna go after other rights? That's how all this cycle begins. So it is definitely dangerous route they're taking to keep saying in the name of protection, in the name of this, we're gonna silence you, we're gonna silence this. And that's what North Korea did, right? In the name of equality, pure equality, you're gonna get rid of, freedom of speech, freedom of gathering, all of this. And now they're left with nothing. Only people are allowed to do is just breathing.
So why did you stay at Columbia?
It was my father's dream for me to be college educated. I found it was not worth it. It was so to this day degree that
It was so
It was a waste of time, energy, and money.
Really? That's a terrible thing. That's terrible.
It was. Honestly, I tell like my son that if you want to study humanity in one of these universities, I'm never gonna pay for it. Like I'm so clear on that to my son. But
I'm so embarrassed about that. I'm so embarrassed about that. It's so awful to hear that. Those universities, they were great, They were great.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. And it's not that long ago that they were great, that they did what they said they were going to do. And if you went and got a humanities education, you got educated. You learned to write. You learned to think. You learned history. You learned to be cultured. That happened. It wasn't that long ago. It was when I went to university, it was still like that. When I taught at Harvard, it was still like that. There were politically correct murmurings and rumblings, but by and large, the university was still uncorrupted. And the humanities are at the core of the university. If they're corrupted, if they've gone in the way that you're already describing, there's no way the universities can survive. They're not technical schools. The core of the university was the humanities. I mean, look at what Animal Farm did for you. Mm-hmm. That's what reading great books does for people. It illuminates their soul. It's not optional. And I'm so appalled that was your experience at Columbia. It's so awful that you went through all that and managed to get to this great university, and that you had to shut yourself down, and that your basic conclusion was that it was a waste of time. Now, did you have courses where that wasn't the case? Did you have courses that were worth it?
I mean, so one class I remember in my senior year, it was called the Western Civilization, the music art. One of the core that Columbia had is the Western art and the music.
Has still,
right,
not for long.
But then I was excited to learn about, but at the end of the day, this is still the West. America is in the West, right? It would be funny if you want to study Eastern music at the end of in the core. And professors like, who has a problem with calling the Western civilization like art? And then every single one of them all lifting their hands because they were saying there were so many artists who were greater than Beethoven and Mozart. We silenced them, erased them all. And that's why we have to now end up studying these like bigots, who are racist. And I'm like, and then they were like looking at me, why are you not putting your hands up? Somebody who doesn't have the problem with talking about Western civilization. So that's just like, I was like, do I even have to do this to graduate? And that was, of course, necessary to do that course to graduate. So every class had an element of being a politically correct and shaping you how you think. And I learned how to censor myself so well after Columbia. And then I was freaked out one day. It's like, what am I doing? This is not what I escaped, you know. It just, and
I'm so ashamed of that. That's so awful. I can't believe it. You know, it's no picnic to watch these great institutions hang themselves.
yeah. I literally felt like it's a suicide of civilization. Like, we are killing ourselves here, and that's why I was like, what? I mean, that's what scares me, is that when I was so grateful to going to South Korea, was outside of North Korea, there was at least a place that was left to be free. And all these people obsessed fighting for, you know, climate change, animals' rights, gender equality, transgender, whatever, all these things people are fighting for. Wonderful. But then imagine when nobody is free in this world, who's gonna fight for us? And that's like what terror for me is. Like, imagine all of us became enslaved, like North Koreans, all of us did in that system. There's no one can stand up for any of us. And I guess because I always knew that it wasn't guaranteed. Like, when I go camping with my friends somehow always have confidence that they're gonna find food, even though when they're going to the remote area. Not me. I always packing this like energy bars, blah blah, always with me, because I know like you can end up not having ever all food. So maybe this is a mentality that in the West, freedom was always there. Somehow people think it's gonna be miraculously gonna be always there. And for me, it's like, no, it can be not there.
That's why we were supposed to be educating young people. We were supposed to be teaching them that no, it's not always there. It's fragile, and you better take care of it, because the default condition is authoritarian starvation. And if that isn't happening, it's a bloody miracle.
Yeah, that is. And that's where I am at right now with North Korea. While of course I'm fighting for my people's freedom, but there's so much interest in, like, even Hollywood. They do not want to stand up anything behind the thing is challenging Chinese Communist Party. No mainstream, no Hollywood stars, nobody in America want to be behind the movement that challenges Chinese Communist Party.
Well, I've seen this over and over in the universities too. You know, it was often the case that it was my psychology classes where the students learned about what happened in Stalinist Soviet Union and Maoist China. They hadn't been taught at all. They hadn't been taught that tens of millions of people died in China. They hadn't been taught about what happened in North Korea. They hadn't been taught about what happened in Russia. It was like that never existed, even though the Cold War was all about that. And it's appalling. And I think you see exactly the same thing. Well, you're pointing out exactly the same thing. How blind can we possibly be?
I know, it's like the people say like, oh, Hitler killed so many people, but do you know actually Mao killed the most human beings on earth? He killed like 50 to 60 million people. The Chinese communism killed more people than anybody ever did in our human history.
Yes, and the Chinese Communist Party still controls China. And the only reason people aren't starving to death there now is because they adopted, because they had no choice, essentially, because people did start to rebel to some degree. They introduced free market transformations. It's the only reason that China has emerged as powerful economically as it is.
Yeah.
So, what's next for you? You've graduated from Columbia. When did you graduate?
January of 2000 last year.
I got to ask you again. Wasn't there at least one course that you took there, taught by someone that taught you what you wanted to learn?
One course. Well,
You should know. Like if there was, you'd know. You'd know.
I knew. I liked about the evolution class about how the humans we became who we are. Going through Homo erectusum, like habilis, or the humanity journey. But then, of course, they always had a political correctness element, always in the textbook, everywhere. So there's not. I like the economic classes a lot because it really helped me understand how the world worked in some other ways. But then, of course, it's all about like the payment, gender inequality payments, blah blah, all that like macroeconomics has that thing. So I think it filtered out. It was good, but I don't think it was worth of that amount of money, especially, and the effort to go. You can't take them on like online these
Look,
days.
I had lots of professors who were great. Like I went to this little college when I was 18, 17, I guess, because that's when I went to college. And it was just an adventure for me. I got the people who taught me. I had an English professor. His name escapes me at the moment, unfortunately. Dennis Wheeler was my political science professor. I remember that from 30 years ago. I can't remember my English professor's name, unfortunately. I had a philosophy professor named Longenbach, like 6 or 7 professors. And it was a small college. It wasn't an elite institution. And they loved to teach. And I had a group of friends that loved to learn, and it was great. Like, it was great. I learned a tremendous amount. I learned that I didn't know how to write, and they taught me. Robin Burke, that was the English professor's name. He gave me a D on my first paper. It shocked me to death because I'd got good marks in high school, and I didn't know what I was doing, and he pointed it out and helped me learn to write. And these people were very serious. We walked through Plato and Aristotle and Hobbes and Rousseau and the full breadth of Western philosophy, and it was exciting, and there was no politically correct nonsense. And that doesn't mean that it didn't cover the political spectrum. A lot of my professors were democratic socialists, not all of them, but plenty of them were, so they covered the political spectrum. So, and I would say too, when I was at Harvard and at the University of Toronto, for that matter, that there were no shortage of professors who were providing genuine education that wasn't contaminated with propagandistic nonsense. And so I'm stunned to hear that you can't bring to mind a single example from your 4 years where you got. See, you should have been exposed to people that had the same effect on you as George Orwell's Animal Farm. At least people who walked you through literature of that caliber and who had respect for it. At minimum, you should have got that.
Yeah, but they instead told me not to read Jane or Jane Eyre because they had a colonial mindset that's gonna brainwash you, without you knowing it. So the problems of reading the Western classics is they were all like bigots and racist and believed in slavery. So it was because
it's an amazingly it's a lie that's so profound that it's absolutely staggering. It's staggering to me to hear again, even though I've been watching this for the last 20 years, watching it develop. It's staggering to me that that this can actually be the case, that's what's taught about this tradition that actually produced the first emergence from slavery that's ever existed anywhere.
I know, it's just like in North Korea, history was forgotten. Like our history begins when Kim Il-sung was born. And everything before, we don't even know what Big Bang was. We don't even know who Shakespeare is. Like we don't know who Romeo and Juliet is. And everything was forgotten other than Kim's revolutionary history. And when I came out, what I loved about was that the continuation of life, that life before Kim's. That was amazing. There was things beforehand, way beforehand. It was very humbling to those people who thought through things. And you were talking about Plato. I read Plato's On Love and how he brings these people talk about discussing what love is each mean for them. And he gave me so much like just insights, to understanding humanity. But now,
Yeah, well, that was kind of the point.
I know, but going to Colombia, the first thing is like, who loves Jane? Like I said, like, yes, but do you know the problem is like, no. Do you know that she believed in all those like ideas back then of colonializing other people, countries, and how that embedded in her literature work? And that was like, whoa. I mean, so they expect everyone in the history to think the same way they do right now at this point, exact same time. And if
which is to basically memorize, 20 platitudes that anyone intelligent can memorize in 15 minutes, and then to dismiss the entire world of knowledge. These books, when you were reading Orwell, and when you were in that little room in North Korea or in South Korea, and you had all those books, what were you reading? So Orwell affected you. Who else you've read now? Who's affected you?
It's in a lot of ways. I remember the Siddhartha, the novel is a fictional novel.
Hesse.
Hesse. That book really gave me a lot of comfort and how to think of my own journey and what kind of things I need to focusing on. Like I could be focusing on, oh my God, what I went through. That was very horrible. Or what could I focusing on? So I read a lot of classical books, actually. And I think now I'm thinking it was actually a good thing. I didn't pick up these political correctness books, but rather going time way before then, like 18th century, a lot of literatures. So I think a lot of books shaped me in many different ways. And now till this day, I was just saying, like, reading your book was, of course, you heard that many million times, but it was, people said like you read to know that you are not alone. And that's the thing, when I was reading your book, it just reminded me of that, the struggle, the shared struggle that we have on earth. Regardless, you're born in North Korea, in America, there's still people kill themselves in America. Life is unbearable for anyone. It gave me a lot of compassion because after coming from North Korea to go to New York, like, right, all my 70% of my friends going to therapy. And they tell me, Yeonmi, you gotta go to therapy. And I was like, what is therapy? And of course, coming from North Korea, what do you know what trauma is even? And back then I was like, the fact that you know trauma is, like, you are so privileged, you don't need the therapy. That's how harsh I was. And I wasn't able to empathize with my friends in New York. Like, they would go in line for 2 hours to get into this like delicious like restaurant. And food to me was always quantity. It was not about quality. So why would I be sitting here with you for 2 hours and get in the line, right? And just understanding all of those like layers of, emotions. And that's why I'm very grateful for your book and how you shaped me.
What's next for you? What do you want to have happen now? What are you aiming at?
So I'm on the target list of Kim Jong-un. I'm on the killing list. It's been a while, but we know Kim Jong-un killed his half brother in Malaysia. He doesn't absolutely care about killing distance. Like, even Saudis killed their Jamal Khashoggi in their council in Turkey and chopped him off. So there's no consequences. The world has way no accountability for these bad guys killing people now. And I think that's why this justice something keep always in my mind. Well, if I'm lucky enough not to get killed, I want to do everything I can to raise awareness about Chinese role on enabling this dictatorship. People often think Kim Jong-un is the one who to blame to running the biggest concentration camp on earth. But it is not. There is an enabler behind that is China. If without China, North Korean regime cannot even alive be in one day. And
right, and so we can say with no hesitation whatsoever that there's absolutely no excuse whatsoever for the Chinese Communist Party's support of the North Korean regime.
Yes, it's a crime against humanity. It is a crime against humanity, and we have every international community with their senses. They have to come together to tell China that. But now everybody's bought by China. I mean, they own Africa. They own so many countries. If America loses their ground with China and then gives in and do not stand up for what we believe in this country, we might lose a chance to be ever free and win with China. This is a very serious battle that we are in. It's not a joke that and I think that's the thing. America has a last chance. The Western, these democracy countries has a last chance to battle with China, but because until in the past, we thought the democracy was going to prevail. But the thing, look at China. Free market didn't help the free politics. They are developing these AI machines to facial recognition to control people in a degree where we never even imagined before. It is truly 1984 by George Orwell. They can even look at cameras to see who's there. North Korea started in their malnutrition state, they are buying these AI machines, putting on the town, so it sees who's a stranger is in this town or not. Putting these facial recognition cameras on the border and make sure everybody who's in the place right there. So either we become forever enslaved to this totalitarianism, or we break off the cycle. And I don't know, I can never be that person recklessly say we're gonna win in this battle. And to me, this is a very dangerous state we are all in collectively, everywhere in this world, that we are not safe from this devil, communism.
That's a good place to stop.
Yes. Sorry, that was very intense interview. It's been.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for.
You're quite the creature. I really wish you would have had better professors. You deserve them.
No, thank you for everything you do. Seriously, doctor. It's been, you have no idea how it touches so many, us and me especially, and reminding me of how good still humans are, and really